words, and then let's take a look at our solution. So we'll start off with just a little bit of some code reading. So I'll kick it off. So on line 11, there's an opening tag for an H1 element, some text content, and then a closing tag for the H1 element. On line 12, there's an opening tag for an article element. Caroline, could you
Yes.
start us off and could you do 13 through 18?
Yes, on line 13, there is an opening tag for the H2 element, which has two attributes, an ID and a class, followed by text content, followed by the closing tag for the H2 element. On line 14, there's an opening tag for the P element. On line 15, there's text content. On line 16, there's text content. Line 17, there's text content, and on line 18, there's a closing tag for the P element.
Awesome, thank you. Line 19, closing tag for the article element. Rukaya, could you do 20 through 25, please?
On line 20, there's an opening tag for the article element. On line 21, there's an opening tag with the H2 element with an ID and a class attribute, followed by some text content and the closing tag for the H2 element. On line 22, we have an opening tag for the paragraph element. On line 23 and 24, there's some text content. On line 25, there's a closing tag for the P element.
Perfect. Line 26, closing tag for the article element. Line 27, opening tag for the article element. Line 28, opening tag for the H2 element, an ID attribute and a class attribute being assigned strings, some text content, and then a closing tag for the H2 element. Line 29, opening tag for the P element, some text content on 30 through 32. Closing tag for the P element on 33, and then a closing tag for the article element on 34. So we'll go take a look at our CSS now. So we have all of these articles. Inside of our articles, we have H2s that have some IDs and classes, and we could use this to apply styling elements. But let's take a look at our CSS. So Caroline, can you please read 1 through 4? And I'll give a demo for everyone of how we're going to code read CSS. So the way that we code read CSS is to say on line 1, there is a new CSS rule set selecting the body element, and then an opening curly brace for the declaration block. And then inside of our curly braces, you'd say on line 2, the color property is being assigned a value, a hex code or something, or the font family property is being assigned the value of sans serif. So inside of the curly braces, we have properties and values. And as far as this, we have a new CSS rule set, and then what is it selecting? So Caroline, go ahead and give it a shot, 1 through 4.
So on line 4, there's a new CSS rule set selecting the body element, followed by an opening curly brace. On line 2, there's a color property, followed by value of hex color. On line 3, there's the font family property with sans serif value, and on line 4, there's a closing curly brace.
Perfect, thank you. Rukaya, could you do 6 through 8?
On line 6, we have a new CSS rule set for the H1 selector, followed by an opening curly brace. On line 7, we have the text align property being assigned the value of center. On line 8, we have the closing curly brace.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Line 10, there's a new CSS rule set selecting the article element, opening curly brace. Line 11, the padding left property has a value of 16 pixels. On line 12, the padding right property has a value of 16 pixels. Line 13, the border property has a value of 1 pixel solid. Line 14, the border radius property has a value of 6 pixels. And then on line 15, the margin bottom property has a value of 16 pixels with our closing curly brace on 16. Caroline, could you do 18 through 21?
On line 18, there is a new CSS style rule set selecting the class element attribute title, followed by an opening curly brace. On line 19, there's the font family property with the value of monospace. Line 20, there's a font size property with a value of 24 pixels. And on line 21, there's a closing curly brace.
Awesome, thank you. Rukaya, could you do 23 through 25? And with hashtags, we're talking about IDs.
On line 23, we have a new CSS rule set, selecting the ID HTML. With an opening curly brace. On line 24, we have the color property being assigned the value of red. On line 25, we have the closing curly brace.
Perfect, thank you. Line 27, we have a new CSS rule set selecting the ID CSS and opening curly brace. Line 28, there's a color property being assigned the value of green. On line 29, closing curly brace. And then Caroline, finish this one off, 31 through 33.
On line 31, there's a new CSS style rule set selecting the ID attribute with JS, followed by an opening curly brace. And on line 32, there's a color property with the blue value. And on line 33, there is a closing curly brace.
Awesome, thank you. Take a look at some of these quiz questions. Rukaya, can you tell me what are the names of the individual pieces of a CSS rule?
So a CSS rule consists of the selector, which can be the HTML element, an ID, or a class. It's followed by an opening curly brace. So basically that opening and closing curly brace is like the declaration block where we have the properties being assigned values to however we want to style our HTML.
Yeah, exactly. So we have our selector. So what element am I trying to actually target and apply styles to? Then our curly braces to indicate our declaration block. And then inside of those curly braces, we'll have a collection of our properties and their values. And the properties and values are separated with a colon. And then each property will end with a semicolon. Awesome. Trey, I know you're on no talk mode, but I have the chat open if you want to answer in the chat. Can you tell me in CSS, how can I select elements by their class attribute? Yep, exactly. So we use the dot followed by the class name. So just like what we did right here on line 18. We have that dot or that period, and then we follow it up with whatever class name it is that we were wanting to target. So whenever we wanted to just target any sort of class, that's where those periods are going to come into play. Whereas in Caroline, what about by their tag name? How can I select an element by their tag name?
By the tag name, we just write the tag name.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
all.
Yep. So whenever we select an element by its tag name, we literally just need to put the tag name. So I literally just put body, I just put H1, whatever tag it is that I wanted to apply my styles to. And then Rukaya, in CSS, how can I select an element by its ID attribute?
So we use hash for that.
Yeah, so we would use the hashtag. I like that one because I feel like it ages people, because some people still say the pound sign, or some people say a hashtag. Mainly it's hashtag these days, but yes, that hashtag or that pound sign, that is how we would select elements by their ID in CSS. Awesome. Did anyone have any questions about the CSS syntax, anything that they were reading or anything that they came across as they were working on the exercise? Seems like we're all good. Let me double check the chat, make sure there's nothing there. Yep. Sweet. Yeah, I don't necessarily have anything else to mainly talk about this one. It was kind of just a little intro to get you used to the syntax, and we'll talk about other things kind of along the way. But just clarifying that whenever we're trying to select any sort of class in CSS, we'll always make sure to include that dot or that period. You can see if I hover over the selector, VS Code actually tells me what I'm trying to select. So it says, oh, you're trying to select an element that has a class of title. It doesn't know what that element is, but it knows that it has a class of title. Same thing with these IDs. Doesn't know necessarily what element's going to have the ID, but it does know that it's being applied to that ID HTML. Whereas when I hover over this, then obviously you know that it's only being applied to articles. Rukaya?
So classes are shared with like by multiple elements, right? Like multiple elements can have the same class. So we're basically applying the same style to all of those elements, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's really where the power of classes come into play, is that I can reuse classes. So I don't know about today, but the next few days we'll cover exercises where essentially we can create layout classes, where I can, a lot of the times I'm gonna have the same styling and I want to be able to reuse that styling against multiple elements. For instance, like yesterday, we were talking about tables, that web pages are just collection of rows and columns. So as we start creating our own web pages, we're gonna maybe have like a row and then 3 columns. Well, what if I have another row and another 3 columns somewhere else? Well, I don't want to have to rewrite all the same CSS and everything I already did. So what I can do is I can create a class and I can give them both the same class. So yes, so classes can be shared, so I can give them to as many elements as I want. So I can go and I can give the P the same class as well. IDs are the only ones that are unique, but you can give the same class to as many elements as you want, and it'll also carry over those same style.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, we'll definitely dive much deeper into it as we talk about the more individual pieces as we come across them in CSS. But let's jump into our next exercise then, which will be awesome. So now you've just gotten acquainted with the basic syntax of CSS. Now you're going to be learning about some more ways of kind of working with some CSS. So now you're going to be learning about how we can use fonts and colors in CSS. So you'll be learning about how we can control font. So how can I change what font I want an element to have? How can I change the sizing of that font? So what properties should I use? How can I change how that font looks? Is it a bold font? Is it not bold? Should it be italicized? Should it not be? You could even transform it. Do I want it to be uppercase? Do I want it to be lowercase? Do I want to add underlines? So there's quite a lot of some properties we can use with text to change how it behaves. With colors, we have foreground colors, we have background colors. And then even with colors, there's multiple ways of how you can apply colors. So we'll talk about some of those. So for this exercise, what's going to happen is you're going to go to Google Fonts, and then you're going to select 2 fonts. So we have a little GIF here that will kind of walk you through it. You're going to go to Google Fonts. You're going to select 2 different fonts. So you're going to select 1 font for all of your headings and 1 font for the rest of the just normal body content. Once you select it, it'll show you what you need to add to your HTML. So you're going to add some HTML inside your head tags, and then it'll also show you how to apply the CSS for those specific fonts. And here's kind of what you're building, is you have this little sign up for early access now. And so now you're just going to use colors to try to recreate this, and then also using those fonts. So you don't need to try to find the fonts that I'm using. Feel free to use whatever fonts you want. Just make sure you choose 2 different fonts. So this sign up for early access now, this should be 1 font. The other text, like on the button and inside of the input, would be a different font. So we have that 1 font for the heading and the other font for the rest of the body content. As we're diving more and more into CSS, we're going to be having some more CSS challenges where I'm going to give you some sort of a mock-up image and you need to try to recreate it as close as possible. So something like this, you're trying to create this. Well, maybe you're like, I don't know the exact color of green that I'm using. There's an extension called Color Pick Eyedropper, and I'll share it in the chat as well. And if you download this, what it'll do is it'll pull up this little eyedrop thing, and you can hover over essentially anything on the page, and it'll show you the exact color of what something is. So if you're ever trying to work on a CSS challenge and I gave you like an image and you wanted to find the exact color of green I was using or the exact blue or whatnot, you can use the extension and then just hover over it and then it'll spit out the color for you. And so now you get the hex code, or you also get that RGB value. You can use that. Yeah.
I was wondering, what would you say is better to use, the RGB code or the hex code, for like just sticking with one type of
Preference.
style of writing.
It's preference. Just choose one and stick with it. Doesn't matter. Yeah. You could use hex code, you could use RGB.
Choose one and just stick with that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can
Some
we-
people like hex code, some people like RGB, because then I think RGB is easier to change because I know how much red, how much green, how much blue. So I can easily kind of change the colors by changing how much red, green, and blue. But there's we'll talk about a couple more, but yeah. Noah?
No, it's just like because of when you try to just put the color name like a green or light green or something.
Mhm.
You can like go hover over like the color, see how they give you like a chart. so
Yep.
you can-
Mm-hmm.
Same thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one way of applying colors, yeah. Rukai?
So we spoke about adding fonts with Google Fonts, but what if like there was a font on my system and I wanted that on the web page?
You would have a like a font file. It would be like a .woof or like a dot something. And then there's like a specific CSS property. Import local fonts CSS. Yeah. I think it's yeah, font face. And so then you would use the font face, you'd say what the name of the font is, and then you'd have an SRC property, and then you would just point to your local font file. So you would just have a folder somewhere in your project where you're probably keeping all of your fonts, and then you would just use this to load in those fonts. Yeah, okay.
But then would that font display on your system?
Yes,
Since
because it would be bundled with your project code. So now whenever you were to go deploy your website or whatnot, the code for that font is associated with your project. If you didn't put your font files inside of your project, then it wouldn't work, because then it would only be on your actual computer. But if you have the specific font file, like the WOOF, the OTF inside of your project, then anyone that uses your application would have it.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, there's like something wrong with the relative path. So yesterday, while I was doing the CSS, and the CSS file, I don't know, like the description of the exercise, they wanted to put the name of the file and the CSS. So when I put it over there, it's okay, but well, when I try to do my way, like try to see my location and going through that to the file location, it didn't work. I don't know why the CSS works, but when I try to do like a slash, the parent folder, and then the name of the file.
You were probably just getting the pathing wrong.
Yeah, but it's not wrong. I was, it's not my location.
Well, in theory, your styles and your HTML are going to be next to each other. So in our links exercise, I said you always want to take the shortest distance possible, which is why you literally just put styles.css. You shouldn't have to go up, because then you would just go back down. So it should just say styles.css, and that's it. Because it's not inside of any other folders, it's right next to your HTML file.
The shortest possible. Yeah, sure.
Any other questions before we get started? All right, well then we'll start working on the exercise. If you do have questions, then reach out, and then we'll group up to talk about it.